Thanksgiving, everybody, and welcome on into our Week 12 Waiver Wire show, where you're getting set for your waivers as we get into the final couple of weeks of the season-long regular season. It is a stretch run, setting yourselves up to make the playoffs and hopefully do well within them also. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, joined here as always by JJ Zacharyson. He is the editor-in-chief of numberFire and FanDuel. JJ, happy Thanksgiving to you. How you doing today?
I'm good. Happy Thanksgiving to you too. You know, it's a great week for fantasy football. We love the Thanksgiving slate. We love, sitting down and not having to worry about work while just watching football and following our teams. But as fantasy analysts, it's also the toughest week of the season because we kind of have to get everything done in 3 days as opposed to 4 or 5.
Yeah, in theory, not worrying about work, but then thinking about late swap for DFS and stressing about inactive and stuff like that. So there's still plenty to be stressed about, but hopefully we can find some time between that to just enjoy it as well. As always, get those questions in for your Week 12 waiver wire questions over on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope page. We'll get to as many questions as we can. Try to get those waiver sets. Bit of a tough waiver wire for this week. So let's dive on in here with Dan. He wants to know our trust level on Duke Johnson for this week. And because Duke plays on Thursday, he is asking a start-sit question because JJ will be back here on Sunday to answer start-sit, but Duke plays Thursday. So he is wondering if he can have enough confidence to not start Duke when his alternatives in half PPR are Jonathan Taylor and Sterling Shepard. So you have decent alternatives. I think that we saw Jonathan Taylor finally come to life a bit in Week 11, finally got usage. Sterling Shepard, definitely like a viable piece too. Would you start Duke in that scenario or hold off and use one of those two guys?
I mean, if it's a PPR format, I think that Sterling Shepard would have the highest floor of those guys. Typically I'm going to lean running back, but, PPR leagues, you can definitely go wide receiver in that case. And Shepard's seen a really consistent target share since he's been back. He's basically operated as the team's number one in terms of volume with Darius Slayton kind of seeing more of the down the field targets. But, Jonathan Taylor's obviously a risk because we've only seen this now for one game where he's been the pseudo workhorse. Duke Johnson's obviously a risk because we've seen him as the workhorse, if you will, but he hasn't done anything with that. But it's a good matchup for Duke. Like I said, if it's a PPR league, I think that I might just say, I'm going to see what happens this week with those running backs, even though I don't mind the matchups by any means, but I'm going to just see what happens there at the running back. Sterling Shepard has a good matchup. I'm just going to go with Shep.
Okay, I think that makes sense. So yeah, Shep has a 24% target share for them since he came back. No big games yet, but against the Bengals, like you said, the floor should be really high. The Yerkus is asking, Tua Tagovailoa or Ryan Tannehill? Tua gets the Jets, which is a great matchup, but also just got benched last week, whereas Tanny is facing the Colts. Repeat divisional matchup, but that game is indoors. Which way would you lean between those two guys?
Yeah, it's tough. I would say that Tua definitely has the better matchup. I wouldn't look at what the Packers were able to do against the Colts and think that anyone can do that. Not only that, right, but since Taylor Lewan went down for Tennessee, we talked about on the show how that was going to impact Ryan Tannehill, and it definitely has. He just really hasn't been that strong of a fantasy asset. So this is tough. I mean, I think it's tougher than what we would assume. I think that I would probably still lean Tannehill. Just because of what we saw last week from Tua. But, I can understand if you want to go Tua because the matchup is definitely there.
Yeah, I think I'd agree there as well because, matchups can only go so far, and there is still a lot of risk there with Tua for sure. Itachi is asking, I know it's early, but they're asking for Kenyon Drake or Gus Edwards. And again, we'll answer this one here because it is a Thursday one. First, before we talk about Drake versus Edwards specifically, what are your general thoughts on Gus Edwards, given what we know right now about the Baltimore Ravens COVID situation, where we do know there'll be no Mark Ingram and no J.K. Dobbins? How are you feeling about Gus Edwards in this spot?
Yeah, I mean, I think, from a season-long perspective, he's like an RB2. The Ravens were actually able to run the ball fairly well against the Steelers the last time they played each other. And the Steelers' defense is good, but it's more of like a bend but don't break type defense. They're obviously playing in a lot of positive game scripts defensively. That certainly helps things. But I think Gus will probably see 15-ish carries in this game. I just worry, what's that receiving upside going to look like? Because number one, Baltimore ranks 30th in the NFL in running back targets. And then number two, Justice Hill is probably going to see some of that work as well. So, I'm not like amazingly high on Gus Edwards, but I think, given the waiver wire and what it looks like this week, and, it's not like running back is easy to just get a guy off the waiver wire and use. I think that he's a serviceable enough, like lower end RB2, maybe mid range RB2, probably lower end RB2.
Yeah, and the concern with Gus Edwards, like you mentioned, Justice Hill actually ran more routes than Gus Edwards in week number 11 with both Ingram and J.K. Dobbins healthy. Now, obviously, that'll go up for Edwards because he ran, I think, 16 and 13 routes in the 2 games without Mark Ingram. But definitely there is a path to a bad game there. So Kenyon Drake gets the Patriots. And we saw Drake actually get 5 targets in that Thursday night game. So would you roll with Edwards or would you hold off, assuming that Drake would be the starter as your alternative there?
I kind of like the scoring environment / what the Cardinals can do more. And I don't mind the game with Pittsburgh and Baltimore, but it's the second time these teams have faced each other. The Steelers have played well against Lamar Jackson, even if you look at what they did last year against Lamar during his MVP season. So I'm not super bullish on, from a season long perspective. It's different if you're looking at just the Thanksgiving slate. But from a season long perspective, I'm not super bullish on the Baltimore offense in general, especially with all these COVID diagnoses that's going down right now. I'd probably just go with Kenyon Drake. I mean, they utilized him well enough. I like the offense more. You can run. I mean, New England, you can do anything on at this point. So I'm probably going to lean Drake there.
The other thing that's good with Drake is he's an additional week removed from his ankle injury. He didn't play 50% of the snaps in that Thursday game, but it was also a short week with that ankle injury. Now he's had 10 days to rest up. I think Kenyon Drake's actually in an upward trajectory right now. Francis is asking, do I pick up Andy Dalton and bench Ryan Tannehill for him this week? It's a deep bench where they can afford to hold 2 quarterbacks. So it's a situation where they'd be holding Tannehill, but would add Dalton to use him this week against Washington. Would you do that, or would you stick with Tannehill?
Probably stick with Tannehill. I don't, it's just tough to trust Andy Dalton, period, right? And then the other thing, too, is that we've seen randomly, Washington has the pieces to be able to generate pressure, and I worry about that as well. I worry about Andy Dalton I know this is narrative-driven, but in a pseudo primetime type game. I mean, there's enough to get me off of Dalton, where the only way, basically what I'm saying is the only way I play Andy Dalton is if he's in a perfect spot, and I don't think this is a perfect spot.
Yeah, last week they faced a Vikings team that can't generate any pass rush. The offensive line for Dallas is better now than it was when they faced Washington the first time because they had Zach Martin and Joe Looney back, but it's still not a good offensive line, and that's a concern against Washington's pass rush. So I think it's important to keep in mind the context of these matchups for the Cowboys. This is not the type of defense that they will be best against. Itachi is asking, Arizona or Chiefs defense pickup. Now, I think that's a tough one because obviously Arizona is facing New England. They don't throw that much, and that's a downside for opposing defenses. The Chiefs are facing the Bucs, and yeah, Tom Brady's thrown a lot of picks, but he's also shown the ability to have really good games. There might be better options out there, but if you had to choose between one of those two, JJ, Arizona against New England or Kansas City against Tampa Bay, where would you lean?
I think Arizona's a little bit safer of a bet in general. I mean, Kansas City's defense also hasn't been performing all that well over the last couple of weeks. You look at what they did against the Raiders. You look at what they did against Carolina. Wasn't the most impressive outings in the world. So, yeah, but what you said is true. I mean, this is a pretty decent week for streaming defenses. You look at, the Giants are out there in 85% of Yahoo leagues. Seattle's a defense that I actually like a lot this week and moving forward because they have a really good. I think they play both New York teams and Washington after they get Philadelphia this week, and they've been a different defense with Carlos Dunlap. So there are other defenses that are out there in a lot of leagues that I would prefer over both of these options.
So another defense streaming question. We'll get to the other questions here in a second, but from Elias, they're asking the Giants are the obvious defense, but who would you pick next between the Saints, Packers, and Seahawks? The Saints get Drew Lock. The Packers get Nick Foles or Mitchell Trubisky, and the Seahawks are the team we just talked about. So between those 3 choices, where would you go?
I mean, I think the Saints have to be it, right? I mean, I know it's your boy.
No. We've got more data. I'm good.
Yeah.
You're right.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing with Drew Lock, though, is that he's pushing the ball down the field so much, and it's perfect for opposing defenses. I mean, that's part of the reason why they're performing as well as they're performing. And then if you look at New Orleans, too, basically since I think it was like the Chicago game, their defense has played really well. I mean, last week against Atlanta, they played well. Remember that game against Tampa Bay where they got up really big early? They played well. So I think the New Orleans defense is turning around a bit, and then you get this matchup. So yeah, I'm gonna go New Orleans.
Yeah, and I think that we've seen this with Sean Payton defenses before. I know it's not Sean Payton defense, but like with the Saints defenses before, slow start, get better as the year goes along, continuity gets better. I think potentially we're seeing something similar here once again. Joey is asking, who should I prioritize on the waiver wire between Daniel Jones and Taysom Hill? Daniel Jones, some good matchups coming up, and he gets Cincinnati this week, but Taysom Hill got that rushing juice. Who do you prefer between those two?
Yeah, to me, this one's pretty easy. I'm going to go Taysom Hill. 10 carries, 51 yards, couple scores on the ground. He basically ran the Drew Brees offense where he threw it deep 3 times and he was actually completed all 3 of those passes, 15 plus air yard passes. So that was good to see. But yeah, you're really starting Taysom Hill because he has that cheat code effect, that Konami code effect where, he's able to run the ball. And it's hurting guys like Alvin Kamara. Michael Thomas was fine enough. Hurting guys like Alvin Kamara, but this is what you get with Taysom Hill. And to me, I think he's a QB1 until Drew Brees comes back.
Yeah, that rushing, the floor you get, but also the ceiling you get from rushing. I think it's so hard to say no to that when you have it as an option to you. Strawberry, wonder if that's an actual name here, is asking, what's the level of trust in Travis Fulgham for this week? Now, Fulgham was amazing earlier on, but now the Eagles have been getting guys back. Fulgham still had 7 targets, though, in week number 11, but now with Zach Ertz probably going to be back this week. So what's your level of trust in Travis Fulgham right now?
Yeah, my level of trust with literally anyone in that offense is not very high, maybe Miles Sanders aside. And look, like I said earlier, so the Seahawks, if you I look at adjusted fantasy points allowed. I have a method of looking at adjusted fantasy points allowed where I see how a defense performs, and then I look at how, I basically opponent adjust that and see how they rank, right? Seattle this season has been historically bad against wide receivers, but that's kind of tapered off a little bit. It hasn't been as bad as it was during the first maybe 7 or 8 weeks of the season. And again, a lot of that has to do with the fact that they have Carlos Dunlap now, and they're now able to actually generate a pass rush. And that's very important. One of the big things that I look at from a matchup standpoint every week is pressure rate and the way that other opposing teams are able to are able to hold against that pressure, right? It's why we use defenses that target, Cincinnati all the time and such. But what's happening with Seattle, and the reason why we look at that is because it can impact the secondary as well and impact those numbers. It's common sense. It makes sense that if you're pressuring the quarterback, they don't have as much time to throw, and they're going to make worse passes as opposed to just sitting back in the pocket forever, right? And in Seattle's case, they have been much, much better all over the place after that Carlos Dunlap trade. So I think it's a combination or signing, or I guess it was a trade. But it's sort of a combination of a lot of defenses are just getting better right now after not really having the cohesion in the preseason, which is also something that we had talked about a lot. So some of these defenses are just naturally getting better, but then you have a point in time where you say, we added a really good pass rusher to this team, and therefore that matchup's not as good. So I say all that because that combined with Fulgham, not being as involved per se, and that offense just not looking very good, and then being awful at protecting Carson Wentz, I'm not very high on this passing attack this week, despite the fact that the matchup looks really, really good on paper.
Yeah, 7 targets in a good offense is one thing. 7 targets in this offense is something very different, and they're just dysfunctional at this point. Now, Paul asked a start-sit question, but it does not involve any players in the Thursday slate. So, Paul, I'd recommend you tune back in on Sunday for JJ's start-sit Q&A. That's at noon Eastern right here on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope channels. But Paul did ask about James White, and I know James White was in 15 transactions. So, JJ, no Rex Burkhead. Is James White someone you are prioritizing on waivers, or is he just an ad this week because there aren't a lot of alternatives?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. If you're in a PPR league and he's out there, I would definitely try to get him. I think he's probably got flex appeal moving forward, but and the other thing too, we know the Patriots backfield sort of operates with these pass catching specialists and then these early down guys. So Rex Burkhead out. That's going to help everyone hypothetically. But don't forget that Sony Michel is probably going to be in. That's probably going to hurt Damian Harris a little bit. But what that means is that James White is probably the one that benefits the most easily from this Rex Burkhead injury. I just worry about, the touchdown equity that he's going to get, which is not going to be very high and very good. And then I worry about just generally how this offense operates. It's very run heavy. And so not only is the touchdown equity not going to be great, there's not going to be a lot of volume in general in the passing game unless they see these negative scripts like they saw last week against Houston. And that's just going to be kind of difficult to predict. So I'm not really that into James White, but I think he's fine enough.
Yeah, like he's an option you can plug in when you have an alternative. Thankfully, we're almost past buys. I think the final bye weeks are next week in week 13. So hopefully we don't need to go to, guys like this anymore. But the reality is we still need some James Whites every now and then. So if you need it, definitely can pick that up. Strawberry is asking about a streaming defense question here. The Seahawks, which a team you like, as you said, or the Dolphins. Now the Dolphins get the Jets. The Jets offense has been much more lively recently, but it's still the Jets and they're still the Dolphins. So where do you go between the Seahawks and the Dolphins?
Yeah, I mean, I think you still have to go with Miami there just because of the way the Jets offense is playing. I mean, they've been so friendly to opposing defenses this year. But yeah, I mean, I like Seattle. I just think Miami's defense has played consistently better than Seattle's throughout the season. So you have that. They get it up there. And then, I mean, you could make the argument easily that the Jets are a better matchup than Philly. So I'm just going to go with Miami there.
Yeah, I think that it's hard to turn down a defense facing the Jets, especially when it's a really good defense that has proven they could generate upside, which the Dolphins have done. Laser Shot is asking about James White. Is a situation where you would feel comfortable using him over like Savon Ahmed or Duke Johnson, or is it more of a lower end guy based on your expectations for White going forward?
Yeah, I mean, so Savon Ahmed's a little bit difficult to judge and gauge right now because that there's just so many running backs in that backfield and who knows how they utilize them going into each week. But I think that at least in this given week and the way that we view, David Johnson still on IR, I would still go with Duke over someone like James White. I just think that there's, there likely is going to be a negative game script for the Patriots offense this week. So I get it. I understand it, but I think that Duke Johnson just has better peripherals, and I know that he hasn't played very well, but at least the matchup is better this week.
Yeah. And I think that we can nitpick Duke a lot, but at least there is some semblance of a floor there. With Ahmed, keep an eye on things later in the week because Myles Gaskin is eligible to come off IR now, so keep an eye on that for later in the week. Massimo is asking, is now the time to drop Joe Mixon to pick up someone like Zach Moss? Mixon officially on IR. He'll miss the next 2 games now, but then also no Joe Burrow when he comes back. So do you drop Joe Mixon to pick up Zach Moss?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you know that he won't be able to help another team in your league, if Zach Moss is on waivers, I would probably guess this is like a 10-team league because Moss is pretty much, in most 12-team leagues, he's already rostered. But yeah, I mean, I'm not expecting a whole lot from Mixon when he comes back. Although, look, last season we saw some Ryan Finley in this offense, and Mixon had a decent second half of the season. I don't think he's going to be worthless by any means. So, it depends. If you can throw him on your IR spot, definitely do that. The thing is, though, dropping him for a guy like Zach Moss, what are you really getting out of that? I mean, are you really going to be starting Zach Moss week in and week out? Because to me, Moss really isn't going to be a week in and week out starter unless something happens to Devin Singletary, right? So a guy like Moss, I'd probably just hold on to Joe Mixon. But if there's a better option on your waiver wire of a guy, I mean, if you're in a really shallow league, then I can understand dropping Mixon more.
I want to stick on the subject of the Bengals here and skip ahead to Darnell, who asked the outlook on Gio Bernard this week and next with Joe Burrow being out. Gio was losing some work to Samaje Perine before. Now he has Ryan Finley as his quarterback, and it's not great. So what's your outlook for Gio Bernard with that in mind?
Yeah, I mean, he's just a volume play at this point, right? I mean, there's nothing really that appealing to Gio's situation. You have a backup quarterback, you have a bad offensive line, and now you have another running back that's starting to dig into your workload. So to me, he's not someone that I'm looking at to start. Basically moving forward, I just can't imagine a situation where, you're going to want to start, if you're in a normal league, that you're going to want to start him, even though he's going to see some volume. Yeah, it's tough to trust anybody in the offense. We had a question about T. Higgins later on, too. I love T. Higgins, but even that's a tough sell with Finley starting. Intrepid Gaz is asking, are we worried about Dalvin Cook's schedule? Should we think about trading for a Josh Jacobs or an Aaron Jones? Now, obviously, JJ, we're at the point in the year where schedule matters, but volume also matters. And it's a pretty big volume dip. So we're still good with Dalvin Cook, despite the schedule, right? We are. I mean, he was fine enough. Like, if you look back at that Chicago game, that one island game, I mean, he was fine enough. He got hurt a little bit in that game too. But, he was fine enough. Aaron Jones and Derrick Henry are 2 guys that everyone should be looking to trade for right now before their deadline, if they haven't had their trade deadline yet. Both of them have unbelievable playoff schedules. And then one of my transactions this week too, was Jamal Williams. I mean, if I'm using the schedule for Aaron Jones's benefit, then I think Jamal Williams down the stretch could also be an RB2, like a lower end guy, but I don't think people are going to view him that way at all. So to me, he's someone that you could also buy. But trading Dalvin Cook, again, we've talked about this before. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago, but it's one of those situations where if you trade away Dalvin Cook and then he goes nuts in the fantasy playoffs, it's going to be rough. Mentally, it would be tough. It would be tolling. Yes. So I would not want to do that.
And it's harder to see Josh Jacobs making you really regret it. Not trading for him. So I think Dalvin's definitely the way to go. Like, volume matters a lot.
Yeah, if it's like Derrick Henry, at least there's an argument. But if it's like Josh Jacobs, it's like, no, you don't need to do that.
That's tougher. Final one here from Mimoon. This one you might have some additional insights on, JJ. The Steelers offensive coordinator said today that Benny Snell deserves more carries, and they want Anthony McFarland involved. James Conner had 13 carries Sunday, and Snell had a touchdown. He's had a bunch of goal line rushes recently. So what we doing with James Conner given all of that, all those red flags?
I mean, can you sell James Conner right now? Like anyone. So maybe you can sell him on name alone, right? But anyone in your fantasy league is going to see this offer for James Conner, and they're going to say, "Oh, I don't have James Conner in my fantasy team. I'm going to see how he's been performing." And then they're going to look.
Oh no!
Yeah. Then they're going to look and see that he's had plus matchup after plus matchup after plus matchup, and he hasn't done anything with them, right? And so, to me, I don't think that you can really trade Conner. The upside is still there with Conner in some way. It's dwindling for sure. I think that what they're saying in Pittsburgh makes sense. Benny Snell has looked better throughout the season than James Conner, and really Anthony McFarland is kind of interesting too, because they don't have that like speedy slasher in that backfield. And he can be that guy. And it's sort of where the NFL is moving a little bit towards. I mean, we've seen like Savon Ahmed look decent over the last few weeks. And it's, he's that same kind of prototype and that same kind of type of running back. And I think his 40 time wasn't as good, but he's still that sort of size speed combo that we see from a guy like McFarland. So I think it all makes sense. I don't think you can trade James Conner though, because you're not going to get anything in return.
Right. That's the downside here. You might as well hold and see what happens, because they're just not getting anything in return, which stinks. But hopefully things break in your favor with James Conner. That is all the time that we have for today. JJ, I appreciate the time, and good luck to you in your leagues in week number 12, and happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks, Jim. Happy Thanksgiving to you too.
Appreciate it. Make sure you find JJ on Twitter at Late Round QB, and check out the Late Round podcast with the 15 transactions column there, and also up on numberFire.com. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck with your waiver runs. Have fun on Thanksgiving. Enjoy the time with the socially distanced family, and we'll talk to you again next week. This has been the Waiver Wire Q&A.